Смотри, 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 идет сюда. Офигеть,
A massive Ukrainian strike on a Russian missile depot has caused a series of huge explosions, sending mushroom clouds into the sky, blasts so big that they've registered as a small earthquake, measuring about 2.8 on the Richter scale. This may be one of the largest Ukrainian strikes on Russian soil. A number of drones have hit a Russian missile and ammunition depot in the village of Toropets in Tver region, almost 300 miles north of the nearest Ukrainian territory. A massive strike and significant success for Ukraine. Firstly, of course, because this is a missile depot that holds ammunition, included guided rockets, missiles that have been used to blitz Ukraine. So this is about degrading Russia's capability. Significant because just images of these strikes, astonishing footage, not just of a fire raging, of fireballs erupting into the sky, but also of multiple explosions, explosion upon explosion upon explosion, giving a sense of what is burning at this location. Now, this was a place that cost Russia tens of millions of pounds to build and was opened amid some fanfare in 2018. So it is a modern facility, which, when Russia's deputy defense minister opened it at the time, he boasted it would keep this ammunition safe, both from accidental explosions and indeed from attacks from the sky. And these are the sorts of facilities where weapons are held under heavy concrete casing to protect them from exactly these sorts of attacks. And bunkers, I mean, apparently some 30,000 tons, according to Ukrainian sources, 30,000 tons of ammunition stored at this site, but they'll have been broken down into a series of discrete bunkers which are normally separated from one another by big earthen berms to try and stop one explosion igniting another. But local Russian officials said there was a massive Ukrainian drone attack overnight and into the early hours of this morning, and the fires still appear to be raging at that depot in Toropets. The reason this matters, apart from the immediate damage that this will do to Russia's war effort, is it speaks to the wider debate that's ongoing at the moment about whether or not Ukraine can use Western-supplied weapons, long-range cruise missiles and ground-launched ballistic missiles, to attack exactly these sorts of targets. Ukraine wants permission from its key allies, but most of all from the United States. President Joe Biden has so far consistently refused to lift that de facto ban. Ukraine is showing with this strike that if the West won't give it permission to use its weapons, it will find another way. Now, it's not clear at the moment exactly what kinds of weapons Ukraine has used, other than the fact they appear to be these one-way attack drones, sometimes called kamikaze drones. These are usually relatively slow-flying drones, autonomous aerial vehicles that are designed just to crash into their targets and explode. They may well have been fitted with sophisticated warheads, effectively bunker-busting warheads, to get through those concrete layers protecting these missiles. It's too early to say at the moment. We'd expect those sorts of details perhaps to emerge, and we know that Ukraine has been frantically developing its own domestic arms industry over the course of this 2.5-year conflict since Vladimir Putin launched that full-scale invasion. But this is what Ukraine wants to do. While it continues to take a hammering on its front lines, particularly in the eastern Donbass, where Ukrainian and Russian forces are locked in this attritional, positional conflict, blasting each other with artillery guns, trying to defend trenches and bunkers from one another, fighting in built-up areas, costing a lot in terms of lives. What Ukraine wants to do is bring the war home to Russia, and we've seen that with its lightning cross-border blitz into Kursk, seizing 500 square miles of Russian territory. And we've seen it over many, many months with its strikes on Russian oil depots and refineries, with its strikes on Russian air bases, trying to hit the airfields that Russia uses to launch the aircraft that launch the missiles that hit Ukraine. And we've also seen it with strikes like this, but perhaps few as spectacular as this one, against missile and ammunition depots, almost 200 miles north of Ukrainian territory, nearly as close to Finland as it is to Ukraine. A significant attack overnight hitting this ammunition depot in Toropets in Tver Oblast. We'll bring you more details as they emerge.
I think certainly if it's reports are to believe that it's taken out Iskander missiles, North Korean missiles, S-300s and S-400s, it is a significant attack. Tver is also just above Belarus, toward Latvia and Latvia. It's relatively near Moscow by Russian standards, in between Moscow and St. Petersburg and Minsk. So it is relatively hard to reach, and the fact that Ukraine most likely is able to reach it, I think, will also have repercussions for Russia, because it will mean that they'll have to move their resources even further back from the front line, which is beneficial for Ukraine because it will make it much harder for Russia to wage its war. Well, I think certainly it's a humiliation for Vladimir Putin. His ministry, his defense ministry, he has repeatedly said that they have the capability to shoot down drones or missiles. So it certainly is a humiliation for him, on top of the humiliation, of course, of the Ukrainian incursion into Kursk. And so I think increasingly it's highlighting to maybe not Vladimir Putin, depending on what information he's receiving, but at least the Russian elite and the Russian public, that really this war is going on far too long, and it seems to be unwinnable for Russia, depending on what Putin decides is a winnable war. But ultimately, it looks increasingly unwinnable. It's certainly going to be there for the long term. I think it does highlight how impactful it is. There are some newspapers, some journals that have been saying that really we shouldn't provide the Ukrainians with weapons because the Russians have moved anything of use away from the 300-kilometer line. This clearly is not the case. The fact that the Ukrainians have been able to hit such a large depot, of course, this is probably over 300 kilometers. So again, it is reliant on the Ukrainians in terms of their own missiles, but those missiles are relatively few, and so the ability to be supplied by the West to be able to hit the depots, command centers, and then use those missiles on top of what the Ukrainians already have would be beneficial for Ukraine and would allow them to continue the war and potentially to be able to negotiate from a position of strength or even win.